Zach Harper, a 21-year-old guy with a hint of sarcasm and a thirst for attention, lived for the moments when he could be the center of attention. From a young age, he loved scaring people, from simple pranks to more elaborate jokes that often skirted the line of danger. His friends had long since gotten used to his antics, even if they often scolded him for taking things too far. But for Zach, it was the boundaries that made a prank interesting. This year, Halloween was set to be his biggest show yet. He not only wanted to scare random passersby, but also film it and post it on YouTube. He dreamed that this video would go viral and help him gain subscribers. Vlogging had become his new obsession. He loved watching his views and likes grow, receiving comments from strangers who admired his ideas. This is gonna be a hit, he thought. No one expects to see something this realistic. His plan was simple yet, as he believed, brilliant. That evening, he would tie a rope to an old tree on the outskirts of town where a little-known path ran. Dressed in a ghost costume, he would hang himself, of course pretending. He figured that night owls passing by would freak out and then notice that it was a prank. He would later take off the mask, reveal the truth, and capture their surprised expressions on camera. Perfect content. Later that night, he was supposed to meet his friends, Trevor and Emma, at a big party on the other side of town. They had been planning this Halloween for a while, and Zach had promised he'd join them after his prank. His friends knew he was up to something, but they had no idea how far he was willing to go. Just imagine their faces when they see this video, he laughed to himself as he prepared his gear. On the table in front of him lay a prop rope. It looked real but couldn't tighten. He grabbed it and tossed it into his backpack along with his camera and tripod. But at the last moment, something distracted him. Trevor had sent him a message. "We're already on our way. Don't be late." As he stepped out of the house, a brief doubt flickered in his mind. Something about the plan felt too extreme. What if someone thought it was a real suicide? What if his friends got mad or he couldn't film it like he envisioned? But those thoughts quickly dissolved into a euphoric anticipation. He convinced himself, "It's just a prank. I've got it all under control." Zach arrived at the old tree, shrouded in darkness and fog. It was the perfect spot for his stunt. Secluded, eerie, with a gnarled tree that looked like it might crumble any moment. He set up the camera on the tripod, checked the angle, and made sure the flashlight on the camera created a chilling ambience. "It all has to look like a horror movie," he whispered to himself, satisfied with the result. He tied the rope to a branch, tightening the knot firmly, and stood on an old box he found nearby. Zach slipped the noose around his neck, feeling a slight thrill. This was the final touch. The camera was recording. He imagined how his friends would later watch this video, how passersby would freeze in horror while he laughed in their faces, revealing the truth. As he stood on the box, his phone vibrated in his pocket. A message from Trevor. "Are you coming soon? We're already at the party." Zach smiled. "Just a little longer and I'll surprise you," he thought. Zach stood on the crate, preparing for his triumphant moment. His heart thudded in his chest, echoing in his ears. A mix of fear, excitement, and the anticipation that his prank would be a massive hit. A light breeze pierced the night, rustling the dry leaves. He felt every nerve in his body, as if nature itself held its breath in expectation. But suddenly, something rustled in the bushes nearby. Zach instinctively turned his head, peering into the darkness. It seemed like someone or something was hiding behind the trees, watching intently. Maybe it was just a passerby or some night creature. But the feeling turned sticky, cold, a silent warning. "Hey, who's there?" he whispered, almost to himself. For a moment, he contemplated climbing down to check. But just as that thought crossed his mind, his world came crashing down. Crack! The crate beneath him suddenly slipped away. Zach didn't have time to react. His body plummeted downward, and the rope tightened around his neck with a sharp snap. The pain and shock hit him so hard he didn't immediately grasp what had happened. A sharp pain sliced through his chest. Instinctively, he grabbed at the rope that dug into his skin, choking off his breath. He flailed his legs, trying to find solid ground or grab onto something. But below him was only emptiness. No crate, no saving earth beneath his feet. This was supposed to be fake. Flashed through his mind as his fingers futilely slipped along the taut rope. Zach was absolutely sure he had taken a prop rope, but this rope was real, hard, unforgiving. He thrashed in the air, his legs kicking in the void, desperately trying to ease the crushing pressure. But the knot only dug deeper into his neck. Every movement intensified the pain. He tried to loosen the noose with his fingers, but he was losing strength. His lungs burned, and his head spun, as if thousands of needles were piercing his brain all at once. Then, from the darkness, like a ghost, a figure appeared, tall, silent, with a face that dissolved into the night mist. In the dim light, it was hard to make out the details, but Zach felt the presence watching him. And not just watching, waiting. A raspy sound escaped his throat. "Help, please," he begged, whispered, desperately trying to form words with his fading strength. His voice turned into a choked groan, but he couldn't stop. He reached out to the stranger, sinking into despair. "I didn't mean to help," but the stranger didn't move, just stood there, watching Zach like a hunter admiring its prey. Then their voice, calm and almost whispering, cut through the silence like a knife through skin. "You brought this on yourself." First, Zach couldn't believe his ears. It can't be you," a thought flickered in his mind. His throat constricted not only from the rope but also from the shock that hit him like a tidal wave. The familiar voice, once safe and reassuring, now sounded completely foreign, icy. "You? How is this possible?" he gasped, but the words came out more like a strangled hiss. Zach desperately searched the stranger's eyes for even a hint of sympathy or an explanation. But instead, he saw only something grim and dark. Satisfaction, hatred, and something worse. An incomprehensible delight in his suffering, as if this person had waited a long time for this moment. "Help, please." But it was just a weak croak, dissipating into the night air. Tears rolled down his cheeks, mixing with searing despair. He felt his consciousness slipping away, like the dim light of a lamp fading before complete shutdown. "You brought this on yourself." The words sounded cold and indifferent. In the final moment, just before the rope completely cut off all air, Zach's body convulsed one last time. A final jerk, a last desperate attempt to survive. His heart made one last thud. His eyes widened in horror, as if trying to catch one more glimpse of life. But from his throat came only a barely audible gasp, a last hopeless exhale. And in that moment, everything fell silent. No sound, no breath, just a still shadow hanging beneath the eerie old tree. Draver and Emma wandered through the dimly lit streets, heading home from the party. Both were in high spirits, buoyed by alcohol and the festive atmosphere. Halloween night brought a sense of carefree joy, and jokes and pranks felt like innocent fun. "Zach promised some big trick tonight," Trevor said with a grin, scanning the trees and streetlights. "Do you think he's pulled off something?" "Probably," Emma giggled. "You know him. He'd even clown around just to get more likes." As they approached the shadowy park where an old tree stood, the moon suddenly peeked through the clouds, illuminating what looked like a prank. "Look, it's him," Trevor laughed, pointing at Zach, who was hanging from a branch. His laughter seemed out of place in that moment, but thoughts swirled in his mind. "It's just a prank." "Whoa, he even tied himself up," Trevor exclaimed. Zach is a master of pranks. But as they got closer, Emma's laughter turned to shock. Zach was motionless, his face twisted in a horrific expression. His eyes wide open but empty. The rope, which had seemed like part of the setup, was now a grim element of this horrifying scene. "Hey, the show's over, you hear?" Emma shouted. Trevor stood frozen, silently watching as Emma pleaded for help while the cold reality settled in around them. Zach hung lifelessly, and a heavy silence filled the air, as if nature itself held its breath. "Zach?" Emma gasped, reaching out to touch his face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and she couldn't contain her fear. "This can't be. It's just a joke." Trevor, his heart racing, moved closer. His face remained calm, though a storm of thoughts swirled inside him. He leaned down to Emma. Her sobs hit him like hammer blows to his consciousness. "Emma, I'm here," he said softly, trying to keep calm in his voice. His hand gently rested on her shoulder, but inside, a dark abyss was opening. I can't take this. Everything was so good. We were going to get married, buy a house, have kids." Emma cried, covering her face with her hands. Trevor felt a twisted satisfaction inside him. She was so vulnerable, and he was her only savior. "It's going to be okay," he reassured her, trying to create an illusion of calm. "I won't leave you. I'll always be here." Emma, not hearing his words, continued to cry. Trevor glanced back at Zach's body. He couldn't change what had happened. He could only be a support for Emma, smothering all the questions in her mind. "Come on, we need to call the police," he suggested. Each word was a struggle, but he knew he had to act. His voice sounded gentle, but inside he felt fear. Why did he do this? Why? Emma asked, trying to gather herself. "I don't know," Trevor replied, looking at Zach's body again. "But we need to figure it out. Maybe he just felt sick, or it was a prank that went too far." Leaning against his shoulder, Emma continued to sob. Trevor could have shattered this moment, but instead he stayed close. Emma, still in shock, looked around and suddenly noticed something on the ground. It was Zach's phone, quietly blinking in the grass. She picked it up and looked at Trevor in confusion. On the screen was Zach's familiar face. "Hey, friends, this is gonna be the prank of the year," Zach exclaimed, a hint of tension in his voice. "I've got something crazy planned for you today." Trevor, feeling the weight in his chest grow heavier, listened as Zach explained his plan. He was climbing onto a platform, clutching a rope, and smiling at the camera. "Are you ready? Then watch how I do this," he said, his voice sounding carefree, though something darker flickered in his eyes. "I can't watch this anymore," she said, turning away. Trevor, anxious, pressed the off button and turned back to her, trying to calm her down. But just then, they heard the sound of sirens. The police had arrived. "What happened here?" asked one of the detectives, surveying the area around the old tree where Zach hung. His partner was taking notes, carefully examining the scene. Trevor and Emma stood to the side, watching in silence. Emma continued to cry, while Trevor tried to maintain his composure, controlling every movement. "This looks like a prank," one of the officers said, leaning down to the rope, which seemed perfectly tied. "But something's off here." The officer inspected the rope, his face reflecting doubt. "This seems like a real rope," he noted, examining the knot. "It looks like someone set this up on purpose." The detectives began to review Zach's phone. One of them pressed play, and the video appeared on the screen. "This can't be happening," one of the officers whispered, his voice filled with horror as they watched Zach struggle for his life. Desperation etched on his face as he fought against the rope. "Attention!" shouted another officer. "A part of the video has been deleted. This doesn't look like an accident." "Are you his friends?" one of the detectives asked, looking at Trevor and Emma. Trevor nodded, trying to maintain a calm facade, though chaos reigned inside him. "We came to the party, but," Emma said, barely holding back tears, "we didn't think this could happen." The detectives exchanged glances, and then one of them pointed to a group of people gathered at a distance. They were discussing what had happened, some even laughing, as if nothing was wrong. "We need to talk to everyone who was here," one of the detectives ordered. "This will help us get to the bottom of this mystery." As the police began taking statements, Trevor bowed his head, trying to focus on everything that had just happened. The situation continued to worsen. As the detectives began examining the surroundings, everything seemed perfectly staged. When the police restored the deleted part of the recording, an unbearable silence filled the room. Emma and the detectives stared at the screen, each frame revealing the horrific details of the incident. Zach, happily showcasing his prank. Suddenly, they saw Trevor, calm and carefree, approaching the platform and shoving it. Zach fell, and Trevor simply watched as his friend fought for his life, making no attempt to help. His eyes coldly observed the scenes of horror while Zach, like a marionette, struggled to grasp at life and begged for help. At the moment Zach took his last breath, Trevor suddenly fled, not looking back. Emma, witnessing this, felt everything inside her shatter. She stood on the edge of panic, feeling reality bend around her once again. During the next question from the officer about why Trevor hadn't helped Zach, she couldn't contain her emotions. "Why did you do this?" she screamed, rushing toward Trevor, anger and despair merging into one emotion. She began to hit him, and the tension in the air felt like all her tears had transformed into anguish. Trevor, observing her aggression, felt fear begin to replace the calm. He looked at her, his voice sounding cold, as if he had disconnected from his emotions. "I always loved you, Emma. Always." His words spilled out, filled with rage and pain. And Zach? He was always the center of attention, always got everything he wanted. "You chose him, and I was left in the shadows, forced to watch you give your love to him. I just wanted it to end, to be in his place, even for a moment." Emma stopped, her eyes filled with tears. She couldn't believe that the friend she knew had turned into such a monster. "You killed him!" she shouted, feeling her heart tighten with pain. Trevor looked at her with disdain, as if his wrongdoing was merely inevitable and he felt no guilt. "It wasn't an accident. I switched the rope to get revenge. Zach had it all. Now he's gone, and you're back with me?" Trevor said coldly, his words ringing like a sentence. No words could further explain this tragedy. The police put handcuffs on Trevor, his face remaining expressionless even as they announced his arrest. At that moment, as Zach's body was being taken down from the tree, an unspeakable horror hung in the air. His lifeless body, like a doll, was dragged across the ground. Only the darkness remained as a reminder of what once was life. Finally, a van arrived to take Zach's body to the morgue. Emma sat on the cold ground, feeling forever distanced from the world, sensing that she had lost the love of her life. Hatred for Trevor ignited in her heart, for the friend who had been like an older brother to her. "You're no longer my friend," she whispered, sobbing, her voice echoing deep betrayal that would remain with her for life. Wiping her tear-streaked face, she realized she would never be able to forgive him. Zach's body was dragged to the van, leaving Emma with an unshakable emptiness in her heart. She watched as the vehicle disappeared into the darkness, taking with it a piece of her soul, swallowed into the abyss where hatred and loss now reigned. And remember, sometimes what seems like an innocent prank can have horrific consequences. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.